Hello, welcome back to People-Centered Innovation. I'm your host, Rebecca Holland. You've already heard my chats with leaders that focus on their work life, but now for something completely different. Can you make your family agile? Today, I'm talking to Ken Poon, Vice President of Technology at District M in Montreal. He runs weekly scrums with his two young daughters and considers it the great untapped parenting tool that you should know about. Hi, Ken. How are you today?
Pretty good. How are you?
Great. Thanks so much for joining us.
My pleasure.
So Ken, you've come to us with a bit of an interesting story about how you've been able to adapt your work practices for your home life. Can you tell me a bit about your background to start off with, and your experience in Agile?
Sure. My background has always been in technology. I've been in the industry for, I don't know, over 25 years now. Like, I look young, but I'm not that young, actually. I started in IT. Interesting story, actually. I started in sales back in the days when we were selling clone computers, and then my boss realized that I was doing such a bad job that he sent me to the back to fix computer instead. And I think that's how I kind of started my career as a whole. But even before that, I had always been interested in computer coding, fixing things, stuff like that. So my career started there, and then gradually I became a network administrator, system administrator, consultant. I've done quite a lot of different areas, from telecom to system to network. And then later on throughout my career, I got the opportunity to work in a startup, which is Lightspeed. Now they're not a startup anymore, obviously. And from there, I would say the second path of my career kind of took off. I got to expose to startup, different way of working in a super fast paced, ever-changing environment, and become an IT manager there. And then later on throughout my career, I got to learn a lot about coaching, Scrum, Agile, putting teams together, how we can help team to work effectively. So I'm both very technical. I could be very hands-on, roll up my sleeve, get my hands dirty, or I can focusing on people, which is what I'm doing right now, and what my passion is all about.
Can you tell me a little bit more about that, about being focused on people and what that means for you?
Yeah, sure. When we look at technology, innovation, product, even any kind of industry, pretty much everything starts from people. Without people, there are no idea that could be nurture or discover. Any kind of work, even though today there's AI, there's machine learning, all that stuff, but everything is built by human. That's why I believe, like, for first focus of any kind of organization and team should be focusing on the people first. And then once you have the people going, and then the people will bring up idea, bring in execution, bring your product, processing, and all that will follow afterward. That's why I love to put the emphasis on finding the right people, working with the right people, coaching the people, help people grow. And for me, that's important.
Yeah. For sure, that's so true. So how did you first hear about Agile and Scrum?
It's really by reading. First, when I was Lightspeed, I look at how the development work, how the DevOps works. I found it very interesting, and then I started to dig a little bit deeper, trying to read a lot of posts, blog, so on and so forth. But one thing came across is the company Atlassian. I think everyone knows about them. And at the time, they caught my interest because they really emphasized on the teamwork and how they scale Agile. At the time, I think they were still a smaller company in today's scale. But they basically open source or open book whatever experiment they've done in terms of agile, in terms of the way they work. So I became a big fan of them. From there, I started to study a lot. I think at some point, I also get to go to their what do they call it? The Atlassian conferences every year. So from there, I got to work with their team, work with other company. So I guess a lot of my skills and my mentality kind of learned from that company. Actually, I think that's how I grow my passion to it because of them. And at work at Lightspeed is kind of like a starting point to make me think outside of the box using different way. And then they kind of help me to accelerate it because they open source all their findings, playbooks, so on and so forth.
Yeah, that's really great that, they have that learning culture and they want to share it with other businesses. I think you mentioned it was at an Atlassian conference that you actually heard about the idea of using Scrum within your family. Can you tell me a little bit more about that?
Yeah, so that's actually interesting. One thing I noticed, like in their conferences, are they have a lot of different workshop and showcasing lots of different idea or tackle specific problem. And one of the Atlassians, well, that's what they call themselves too. So I spoke with, he mentioned that he was working with his kids. He has a couple of teenagers at home, and using the kind of Scrum mentality, kind of the same way that they work at Atlassian, and he brought it home to help them to build that curiosity and learning capacity at home with his kids.
But your girls were really young at that time, right?
I think when I found out, I only had my first girl, and she was like maybe 1 year old at the time when I first found out. So I read about the blog and I chatted with him, and it was very, very interesting. I'm like, wow, that's really cool. Maybe this is something that I can do later on in my life. Yes. So they actually gave me the idea of all that. And then later on, few years ago, at that time, I have 2 girls already. So one of them is 3 years old, one of them 5 years old. So they both go to the daycare. And when kids at that age, there are a lot of arguments, fighting going on in the house. So it's always like, and we don't necessarily know how to deal with it. There's no classes you take to become a better parent or whatnot. So we're kind of learning along the way. And
I remember you saying that you were trying to mitigate some of the chaos in the household, like you said, the fights and the yelling and at that age, the kind of temper tantrums about brushing your teeth or that kind of thing.
Oh my God, it could be anything, like from fighting between frozen dolls to like going to bed. It could be anything. So there's always some kind of screaming, shouting, yelling. Like there are a lot of frustration and unpleasant kind of going on and off. Then one day I was like, okay, they're 5 years old, they're 3 years old, and I remember about the Atlassian talked about he's using Scrum with his kids, although his kids were teenager, but still like maybe we can do this. I don't know, but let's try it, experiment, right? It's all about learning and experiment. So
sure.
I spoke to my wife, like, look, I don't know if this is going to work, but let's try something different instead of our traditional parenting.
Right. What did your wife think about it originally? Like, had you talked about it, just sort of generally before you decided to implement it with the kids, or?
Actually, no, I kind of had the idea and then I just brought it up to her. I was like, let's try something different. And she was like, sure, anything to make this better, like,
Absolutely.
yeah. So I brought up the idea. Yes, they're young, but let's try something very different to see if that helps, if that works. And yeah, so let's see what happens. And that's how it started.
Yeah, that's great. So, because you had learned about this sort of by working with teenagers, what did you do to adapt it for working with kids so young?
I think the biggest thing is gamified it a lot. Maybe I'll start from the beginning.
Sure. Yeah.
So I sat down with my wife and look, let's come up with a set of our core family value. That's something that we truly believe in. Kind of like company, they have their core value, and every time they have an issue or trying to solve a problem, they always go back and question their core value and how to answer or solve that particular problem. So as a family, so we think that that might be important. We didn't know at the time. Let's write it down, put it on paper, make it clear the set of value, because we all have some sense of what kind of values we want or we believe in, but we never articulate it or write it down to make it clear. So we decided to do that. So we bust out the marker paper and then just write down like different words and stuff. And finally, we decided on a set of family values that that's for us, for our family. So there are respect, there's being discipline, there's being teamwork. Again, big fan of Atlassian. I believe in teamwork. Resilient, and finally, it has to be fun.
That is a great kind of principle and a great base to start from. So what did you and your wife do after you had established the values?
So when the kids, when they were at 5 and 3, they don't necessarily understand what they mean, those few things. So at the time, they were really for us to help to guide them for later on into their life. So, but we were like, even though they don't understand that, but we could come up with activities or action that's based on those values that they can relate to. So for example, discipline, okay. One thing to learn about discipline is every time you wake up in the morning, you have to make your bed. So that could be one of the action items or behavior they have to do every day. And respect could be you have to listen to other and not just saying no all the time, not fighting all the time. You have to give a chance to listen to the other person, what they need to say. So that could be one of the behavior. So what we did was we built out a kind of dashboard, if you may, not with words, but pictures. So for example, making the bed will have a bed with the sun in the morning. So meaning every morning they have to get
Right.
up and
That's a really great idea to make it more accessible for kids, that, you're not just going to be like, okay, here's a list of words and yeah, just making it
put a lot of color in that too.
Yeah, for sure. It makes it way more accessible to them.
Yeah. And we try to not to put too many. So maybe every day we put like 5 different behavior or activities on the board. So we have Monday to Friday, and then Saturday to Sunday, kind of like a day off. So I think the kids need to break some time too. But at the end of the week, they can have a reward based on how they perform throughout the week. So from Monday to Friday, every day before we go to bed, we sit down with the kids and basically coach them or or teach them how to evaluate themselves, to give the feedback to themselves, so that to build their sense of self-awareness or whatnot. So if Monday to Friday they get certain number of smiley face, so that's one thing we do very differently too. But I think adults can actually totally use it. Instead of using points like running Scrum and development teams, we just use smiley face and mad face. Very simple. They understand it. There's no maybe, nothing. Either it's a smiley face or it's a mad face. So we're going to count how many smiley face they get throughout the weeks. If they reach the goal or target, they will have a reward. The reward could be, I don't know, watch a movie, or they can have ice cream or stuff like that. But those are the things that we kind of elaborated. Those are the things that they do anyway. We kind of just leverage it so that they need to work for it instead.
Definitely. And I remember you told me that just a couple of weeks into this process, you had an aha moment.
Yeah.
Can you tell me about that?
Yeah, sure. So like I mentioned before, both of them were still in daycare, 3 years old and 5 years old. There's one night, so we sit down, just go through our dashboard, same thing. We took out our stickers, and I asked my girl, my 5 years old at the time, and I'm like, so sharing, do we get a smiley face today or do we get a mad face today? And then she looked at me and go, I'm getting a mad face today. I'm like, oh, really? Why? Can you tell me why? She's like, well, at daycare, I didn't share my toy with Juliet. And then all of a sudden, my jaw just dropped. I'm like, oh my gosh, she gets it.
Yeah, that's incredible. Like it's a lesson in empathy that we don't think kids are able to grasp at that age.
Yeah, I think we underestimate the capacity of kids a lot. I think from that, it made me realize that, sometimes we got to give them a little bit more freedom and coach them to learn those skills at a very young age. And to a point that, so I follow up with the questions. I'm like, so do you want to get a smiley face tomorrow? And then she goes, yeah. I'm like, okay, so what do you need to do to get a smiley face? Tomorrow, I'm going to share my toy with Juliet at daycare. I'm like, wow, this thing actually works. I was so happy. I was mind blown.
Definitely.
So, so we've been using that since a very young age. And, we changed the game a little bit. We changed the dashboard a little bit with different reward, different stickers, stuff like that.
Right. And your girls are 5 and 7 now, is that right?
Yeah, they're 5 and 7.
Overall, you think this has had a lasting positive effect on their behavior? I mean, I know from hearing about your girls that they're so well behaved and they definitely have a reputation of being quite polite children.
With my very, very scientific approach, I would say because of that, especially at the early days or early year, the house was easily 50% quieter or more peaceful, if you may.
I think a lot of parents would kill for an extra 15% of peace.
Right. And up till now, I do believe it has a pretty big impact. It enabled their capacity of learning different soft skill sets, because we tend to really focus on academic result or learning, but we don't necessarily put more energy into their soft skill, which personally I believe in the long run it's going to benefit them.
Yeah, you're so right. I mean, the failing grade you got on a math test one time is not going to matter as much as your ability to empathize with your colleagues and to work as a team.
Exactly.
Yeah, I just I said to Michelle, I'm really looking forward to the day 20 years from now when Ken's girls are presenting at an Atlassian conference of their own, or some other Agile or Scrum conference, and saying like, this is how we grew up, and they've got, you know, a whole new way to look at Agile and Scrum because of it.
I actually don't want them to grow too fast.
You're like, don't even think about 20 years in the future.
I know, right? Whew, 20 years from now on.
Yeah, who knows where they'll be.
But it's fun. It's fun. They enjoy it. Later on, they actually do their own dashboard, so we didn't have to do it anymore. They go in and do their drawing. They can write now.
Oh, wow.
They can do it on the wall. Yeah.
So have they kind of evolved their own goals as they've gotten older? And, you know, what kind of
We're
things
trying to get there instead of just running kind of Scrum every day. We're trying to slowly kind of bring in different elements, maybe help them to develop, to think about not necessarily their goal, their goals, but more think about their purpose in general, like what they want to get in life, like what kind of impact they can make. So we're slowly getting into that. Again, the idea is really broad. We're trying to narrow it down a little bit and help them to give them those kind of skills.
That's amazing. I think, you know, you're shedding light on the fact that it's not too early to kind of think globally about the kind of person you want to become. It's not necessarily like, okay, I'm going to be an astronaut, but I want to be someone who shares with everyone. I want to be someone who's respectful to everyone. You know, that's
I do think it's important. Last year I had a chance to go to Dreamforce in San Francisco, obviously before the COVID and everything, and I was lucky enough to be in the Q&A section with President Obama also. There's one thing that he talked within that hour kind of stuck to my head very, very deeply and dearly is there's two things that he tried to teach his kids, his girl, is be kind and be useful. So those two things kind of almost simplify all the value that we put down also, like fundamentally he looked at those two things and then everything kind of built around that. So this is something that we're trying to do right now and help them to develop those two concepts or two value, if you may, and hopefully it's going to be helpful in their life later on.
Absolutely. It must be pretty amazing to think that you're on the same path as President Obama in terms of how to raise your kids.
Hope so.
So just as a last question, I wanted to ask you, do you think that this has had not just an overall positive impact on the family, but how about your marriage with your wife? Do you feel more harmonious there as well? Has anything changed in that regard?
It's an interesting question. I think it takes a lot more to make a marriage work, but it definitely helps, especially sometimes when you have that very difficult conversation, like for example, like you want this couch, but I don't want this couch, or I want a TV.
That can be a big fight. Yeah,
but she doesn't want a TV. So sometimes leveraging not necessarily Scrum specifically, but the thinking behind it, like what are the prioritization, what we should spend our money on, kind of the same as developer, what we should spend our effort on, what brings more value. So in that sense, I think it helps quite a bit to have better conversation instead of just like a shouting match, if you may.
Yeah, absolutely.
So it definitely helps a bit. I think if we can just think outside the box and use those tools and method and apply it to different scenario, different environment in a family, like now with kids or with your spouse, I think it can definitely help. And like I mentioned before, the house was much quieter, right?
Mhm.
So just in that sense, to give that a little bit of peace of mind in the house, it definitely helps. Definitely helps. It's not going to help if you constantly like fighting, screaming, right, as a family, and then the kids are going to learn from you, and they're going to be
Right.
the mirror image of you later on. So what we're trying to do is trying to kind of change. I'm not saying my parents didn't do a good job, but I wasn't brought up the same way, and I'm
Right.
just trying to give them a different way of thinking.
Oh, that's fantastic. Thank you so much.
Pleasure.
Thanks for listening to this episode of People-Centered Innovation. We'll be back later in the summer with more episodes that are just 20 minutes to make you think, spark conversations, and get you seeing tech in a broader way. Special thanks to my guest, Ken Poon. This podcast is produced and recorded by me, Rebecca Holland. Our editor is Igor Vichikov, and our executive producer is Michelle Kwong Rutherford. Our theme music is provided by premiumbeat.com. If you'd like more information on this podcast, please reach out to us. You can find us at Rangle.io/contact us or email me, Rebecca.holland@Rangle.io. Thanks. We'll see you soon.